10. The Rescue. At the first opportunity we had, Marion told me everything that had happened to her and Laura. The hardest part for her was after she had returned to Limmeridge House. "I was in despair, Walter," she said. "Mr. Criley's investigation was finished and had shown nothing," he said. "Mr. Fairley was no help at all. I heard that he didn't even leave his room to go to the funeral. But he did show me a letter he had received from Count Fosco, which contained news of Anne Catherick. The Count said that Anne Catherick had been found and put back in the asylum from which she had escaped. But because she hated Sir Percival and wanted to make trouble for him, she was now claiming that she was not Anne Catherick at all, but Lady Glyde. The Count warned Mr. Fairley that if she escaped again, she might try to annoy members of Lady Glyde's family. I wasn't well enough to do anything for about a month after returning to Limmeridge, but when I felt stronger, I decided to make some investigations myself. First, I planned to visit the asylum in London and talk to poor Anne Catherick to find out why she was claiming to be Laura. I knew the address because you had given it to me all those months ago. Well, Walter, you can guess what's coming, I'm sure. The director of the asylum, who seemed an honest person, told me that Anne Catherick had been brought back on the 27th of July. He was puzzled by some odd personal changes in her, but assumed they were caused by her mental illness. He then called a nurse to take me to Anne Catherick, who was walking in the gardens. Imagine the shock, Walter, seeing my dead sister walking towards me in that garden. We just ran into each other's arms, unable to say a word. How the nurse stared at us. "I think I know how you must have felt," I said. "I shall never forget in the churchyard in Limmeridge. But tell me, how ever did you get Laura out of the asylum?" "Bribery, Walter. I didn't want to risk a legal battle and all the delay that would involve, so I persuaded the nurse that a terrible mistake had been made, and she would be doing a good thing in helping Anne Catherick escape. And I offered her £400. The plan went smoothly, and by early afternoon the next day Laura and I were on the train to Cumberland." "And Laura," I asked, "what actually happened on the day she left Blackwater Park and came to London?" Marion sighed. "Oh, Walter, it's not at all clear. Poor Laura's mind is so confused now that her memory of events is very unreliable. She can't even remember the date she left Blackwater. All she has been able to tell me is this: the Count met her at the station and said that I was still in London and that he would take her to see me at once. She doesn't remember where the cab went, but it was clearly not to his house in St. John's Wood. She was taken to a house in a narrow street where people came and went, asking her questions she didn't understand. At this point the Count told her I was now very ill. She was so frightened by this news she nearly fainted. Someone then gave her a glass of water, which she said tasted odd, and after that she lost consciousness." Poor Laura," I murmured. "She woke up," Marion continued, "in the asylum, unable to leave, unable to make contact with the outside world. She was called by Anne Catherick's name and found she was wearing clothes with Anne Catherick's name on them. She was told Lady Glyde was dead and buried, and that she was Anne Catherick. Anne Catherick, Anne Catherick, day in, day out. From the 27th of July to the 15th of October, she was made to feel that she was mad. It's hardly surprising her mind is so confused now." "And what happened at Limmeridge?" I asked. Marion turned her face away. "I can't bear to think about it," she said. "The worst part was taking Laura into Mr. Fairley's room. He looked straight into Laura's face and said, 'My niece is buried in Limmeridge churchyard. I don't recognise this woman. Remove her from my house before I call on the law to protect me.' Even the servants were doubtful about her identity because she was so much changed and so confused by her experiences. Perhaps people would have been persuaded if we'd stayed longer, but I didn't dare risk it. At any minute, people from the asylum might come looking for us. so I decided to return to London at once and hide. Then, as we were passing the churchyard, Laura insisted on a last look at her mother's grave. And, well, that moment changed our 3 lives. I think God was guiding Laura's footsteps, I said. How well I remember that day, that moment when Laura laid her poor head innocently and trustingly on my shoulder and said, "They've tried to make me forget everything, Walter, but I remember Marion, and I remember you." The plot against Laura was now clear. Anne Catherick had been taken into Count Fosco's house as Lady Glyde, and Lady Glyde had taken the dead woman's place in the asylum. It was also clear that the 3 of us could expect no mercy from Count Fosco and Sir Percival, who between them had gained £30,000 from the plot. They would do everything in their power to prevent their crime being discovered, and would hunt for their victim to separate her from her only friends, Marion and myself. This is why I had chosen a poor and crowded part of London to live in. It is easier to hide in a place where people are always coming and going. Our life quickly took on a regular pattern: work, watching out for our enemies, and care of Laura, whom we surrounded with a gentle, protective love, helping her slowly but steadily to recover her balance of mind and her self-confidence. Meanwhile, Marion and I began the battle. We studied the statements that Mr. Crile had taken from witnesses, the doctor, and the servants and cook in Count Fosco's house. I obtained a copy of Lady Glyde's death certificate, and Marion wrote to Mrs. Michelson, who replied, saying that she could not remember the exact date of Laura's departure from Blackwater Park, nor could she remember when the letter announcing Laura's death, which was undated, had arrived from Madame Fosco. I had also arranged to visit Mr. Crile to ask for his help. After listening to my long explanation, the lawyer shook his head. "My legal opinion, Mr. Hartright, is that you won't win this case in a court of law. I accept, of course, that the identity of Lady Glyde as a living person is a proved fact to Miss Halcombe and yourself, but there is no evidence. If you could prove that the date on the death certificate was earlier than the date of Lady Glyde's journey to London, then you might have a case." As I left, he gave me a letter that had been delivered to him for Marion, and told me, in answer to my question, that Sir Percival Glyde had returned to London. Outside in the street, I soon noticed 2 men following me, and realized too late that the Count's spies must have been watching the lawyer's office, in the hope that Marion or I would go there. I went home by a very long route, and managed to lose them, but it was a warning to me to be more careful. Marion was very worried when I told her about the 2 men. Then I gave her the letter. She recognized the writing instantly. "It's from Count Fosco." "Dear and admirable woman, do not be afraid. Stay hidden with your gentle companion, and nothing will happen to you. Challenge nothing. Threaten nobody. Do not, I beg you, force me into action. If Mr. Hartright returns to England, do not speak to him. If he crosses my path, he is a lost man. F." "Walter," Marion said, her eyes flashing with anger, "if ever the Count and Sir Percival are at your mercy, and you must spare one of them, don't let it be the Count." "I'll keep this letter to remind me when the time comes," I said, "but tomorrow I will go to Blackwater to try and find out the date of Laura's journey to London. It's the one weak point in their plot." "You mean that perhaps Laura did not leave for London until after the date on the death certificate?" "Exactly. I think she left on the 26th of July. The director of the asylum said she was taken there on the 27th. I doubt if they could have kept her drugged more than one night. We know from Mrs. Michelson that Sir Percival left on the same day as Laura. I'll ask everyone in the village if they remember when he left." And if that fails? If that fails, Marion, I'll force a confession from Sir Percival. We have one weapon against him, his secret. Anne Ketherick said that if his secret was known, it would ruin him. I intend to find out that secret. The woman in white, though dead in her grave, is still with us and is showing us the way.